So a few years ago, a friend of mine was at a coffee shop in New York City. She was in grad school, and so she was popping in to get a little bit of work done before heading to her next class. So she orders her latte, and she finds a table. She's settling in, and she realizes she's forgotten a pen. So she goes up to the two baristas, a couple of young men in their 20s, asked to borrow one. And so she walks back to her seat, and she begins to work, but is pretty quickly distracted by the barista's conversation. They're talking about someone they both seem to know well. And one took out his phone, showed the other a photo, and says, "Yeah, you can see, she's totally gaining a lot of weight." The two keep looking down at a series of photos, and he continues, "She really needs to go on a new diet." And at this point, the other barista begins to laugh. My friend is sitting at her seat and is horrified that these men are so comfortably and so loudly shaming another person's body. And she's uncomfortable, and she's weighing if she should stay or if she should say something. At a minimum, just leave the coffee shop. And the baristas continue their conversation. "Yeah, she's really not looking good." To which his friend, still looking down at the phone, responds, "Yikes." And at this point, my friend has heard enough. She packs up her things and she walks over to return the pen and to share her thoughts, debating how thorough of a history lesson about fat phobia and body liberation she will offer. She says, "I know I don't know you both, but I want you to know that you're not in private right now, and your words have impact. I highly recommend learning more about weight stigma and the harm that it causes, not only to whichever friend you're speaking about, but also to everyone in this coffee shop who has to hear your words." And before she's even finished her sentence, both of their faces are turning bright red. But there's also a bit of a tone shift, because they're smiling, and it's clear that they're embarrassed, but that something else is going on. "Oh my gosh, we are so sorry. Of course you're upset with us." My friend begins to realize something is off. The barista turns the phone around and shares, "We're talking about my cat. She has a health issue, and we're trying to figure out next steps." At this point, everyone is laughing, everyone is embarrassed, and everyone is a bit relieved. My friend was overjoyed to recognize that she didn't have all of the information, that these were in fact not the least thoughtful and most fat-phobic baristas in Upper Manhattan, and that she could walk straight out of there and not have to continue to be the person who has called out strangers for talking about their cat. In this week's Parsha, Toldot, we are going to continue in the story of Yitzchak and Rivka. And at the end of last week's Parsha, we read of their meeting for the first time, one that finally brings Yitzchak comfort after the loss of his mother, and one of the few relationships in the Torah that is described as romantic love. And so after some time together, they seek to start a family, but Rivka is unable to conceive. And so together in the presence of Rivka, Yitzchak pleads with Adonai that she may become pregnant, and God answers their prayers. And then we read the following verses. "But the children struggled in her womb. And Rivka said, 'If so, lama ze anochi? Why do I even exist?' She went to inquire of Adonai, and Adonai answered her, 'Two nations are in your womb. 2 separate peoples shall issue from your body. One people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger.'" Not only is Rivka pregnant, but she gives birth to twins, Esav and Yaakov. And in accordance with the prophecy offered by God, they immediately are cast as adversaries. Isaac favors his older son Esav, and Rivka favors Yaakov. Yaakov somewhat slyly convinces Esav to sell him his birthright, and then later on in the Parsha, when Yitzchak tells Esav that the time has come for him, the older brother, to receive a special blessing before he dies, to steal that as well. In fact, Rivka aids in deceiving Yaakov, in deceiving Yitzchak, that the blessing will be given to Yaakov. And at this point, Esav is so devastated when he finds out that his brother has taken advantage of him again, that he vows to kill him, thus forcing Yaakov to flee to safety. So I find this whole story between these two brothers to be devastating. They never are even given a chance. Before they're even born, we see that they are struggling. And then the text tells us that they're destined to be adversaries, not only in this womb, not only in their lives, but for generations. They will give way to peoples who will be at odds. And I can't help but ask, why? Why did it have to be this way? And does it really have to have been this way? Surely their disagreements, struggles to share resources in the womb were not so fundamental that they could not reconcile. Surely there wasn't a scarcity of love to go around. Surely our tradition could have seen space in seeing merits to lift up both of them, both of their lives, both of their legacies, instead of privileging one over the other. And unfortunately, when we turn to our rabbinic tradition, the returns don't look good. In Rashi's interpretation of God's prophecy of these struggling nations inside of Rivka's womb, he writes, "As soon as they leave the body, they will each take a different course, one in his wicked ways, the other to his plain life." And he elaborates, "They will never be equally great. When one rises, the other will fall." Esav hasn't even been born, and Rashi has decided that he is going to be wicked, and that the brothers or the nations that will come from them will never be able to thrive together. And the rabbis of the Talmud take their distaste, or perhaps all-out disgust, for Esav one step further. One of my dear teachers, Rabbi Bert Vizovsky, explains that the rabbis associated Esav's lineage with the Roman Empire, both the earlier pagan Roman Empire and the later Christian Roman Empire, and conflated them into one image of Esav, forever at odds with Yaakov, forever at odds with the people of Israel. For the rabbis, Esav was the enemy. Esav was our oppressor. Esav was the man who kept us beneath his boot. And so this depiction of Esav and his descendants is the predominant one in our tradition. It's the one that I was taught growing up. But I'm really not sure it had to be this way. Because if we take a closer look at this prophecy, we begin to see that there are major cracks in these conclusions. Because God's words in these verses are full of ambiguities and of nuance, and I'd like to believe much deeper meaning. So I'm going to return us to the verse that lays out this prophecy. Quote, "And the older shall serve the younger." It is this line that Rivka and the rabbis used to justify Yaakov stealing Esav's birthright and blessing. But the Hebrew, which reads, "Verav ya'avod tza'ir," can actually be translated in two ways. It is perhaps intentionally ambiguous. Biblical scholar Elliot Friedman suggests that this could mean that the elder shall serve the younger, or the elder, the younger shall serve. It is possible Rebecca received the prophecy incorrectly. By not recognizing a difference in punctuation, her actions set in motion family discord and pain where perhaps there didn't need to be. But even in this interpretation, the brothers are still pitted against one another. one is still meant to rule over the other. And so if we look even more closely at this verse, we see this isn't the only ambiguity in the text. This word in Breshit 25, verse 23, that is generally read as goyim, which means nations, right? It actually has an unusual spelling in our Torah scroll, because instead of the letter vav, it has an extra yud. So with an extra yud in place of that vav, the word actually normally would be read as geim, meaning pride, not goyim, meaning nations. Thus, it would be read instead as two who will make us proud. Rabbi Lydia Medwin expounds that we could faithfully retranslate the rest of this verse to reflect a mindset of abundance. Instead of one people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger, the Hebrew could also read, they'll gain strength from one another, and those in the majority will serve the needs of the youth and of the future. I'm not entirely sure if God's prophecy was meant to tell us that the younger brother Yaakov was in fact meant to serve Esav. And I'm not even arguing that it is a given that the Hebrew word here is supposed to be read geim instead of goyim, and that the two nations were to make us proud and to draw strength from one another. But I am putting forth that the certainty with which Rivka and the rabbis and Rashi and much of our Jewish scholarship jump to conclusion that pit our ancestors against one another is not only a missed opportunity, it's not only dangerous, but it's also quite out of line with so much of our tradition's process that usually is engaged in dialogue and discussion and discernment. My teacher, Rabbi Denny Nevins, points to the fact that the rabbis are in agreement that prophecy is inherently obscure. It is not something that is supposed to be received with absolute clarity. In fact, we read in the Talmud, in Masechet Yevamot, that all of the prophets saw through a cloudy speculum. It was only completely clear for Moses. So for the rest of the prophets, it was always a little bit murky. It was always a little bit gray. And Rabbi Nevins goes further. He says, prophecy is not magic. The role of the prophet was not and is not to force the hand of God, but it's to be guided by God's way. So then we have to ask, what is God's way? It's justice and righteousness. It's kindness and peace. Perhaps Rebekah did understand correctly, and her boys were destined to battle. Perhaps she was justified in deceiving Isaac and depriving Esav of his blessing. But it seems that an interpretation that ensures enmity is of necessity flawed. We can't know how the story might have developed had Rebekah allowed Isaac to bless his older son. But we can work in our own capacity to interpret our sacred tradition in ways that create just and compassionate communities. So next week, many of us will gather around dinner tables for Thanksgiving. And if not then, there may be family gatherings in the coming weeks that will necessitate having hard conversations with people that we love, but people with whom we vehemently disagree. And sometimes people we spend time with hold hateful and inexcusable ideologies or views of the world. And I want to be clear, it is not incumbent upon us to bend and contort ourselves to make space for beliefs that make us unsafe or invisible. But sometimes we might not have all the information. Perhaps we missed a comma or mistook a vav for a yud. Maybe we misread the tone of a text message. It's even possible that the folks that hurt our feelings were not talking about a human being, but an on-the-mend house cat. And so the question really is how do we show up with more curiosity, with greater capacity to learn, to listen, to consider the fact that we might be wrong? At the end of this parsha, we read a verse that again describes Rivka as the mother of Esav and Yaakov. And in his commentary on the verse, Rashi wonders why the text, which has already made it very clear that Rivka is the mother of these twins, again tells us that she is their parent, that she is their mother. Because in Rashi's view of the Torah, no word is superfluous. Every word is there for a reason. So he's curious why our Torah includes this detail again. His only response to his own question is, I do not know what the addition of these words is intended to tell us. Rashi often skips verses. He could have said nothing at all. But he goes out of his way to state that on this issue, on this verse, I don't have an answer. I'm not sure what's going on. Over these coming weeks, I pray that we are blessed to find clarity in the cloudy speculum. I hope that we can ask more questions and make fewer assumptions. May we have the humility to acknowledge when we just don't know the answer. And perhaps instead of becoming warring nations like Esav and Yaakov, we too can become siblings who are proud of one another and who find strength in navigating these murky waters together. Shabbat Shalom.
The